I
I live
in I live in a house.
The space inside of my house is familiar. It doesn't seem to change much, and I find comfort in its routines. At the same time, this house can sometimes feel hellishly boring. In fact, I've noticed that many closed interior spaces with identified uses feel boring to me. At a certain point, these feelings compelled me to try to use public space in Tucson to make something new happen to me. I started out thinking, as I went about my regular days, of places where I could spend unusually lengthy hours. I noticed on a walk that it can be easiest to fall into a sightseeing attitude, which represents only one of many different attitudes to take on a walk. I immediately stopped on the corner between a neighborhood street and an alleyway near a home in Feldman's neighborhood, and, finding a seat below the house's low wall, I stopped moving and looked out at the continuing alleyway across the street. At first, frustrated and uncomfortable, I let myself detach and relax in place. Becoming conscious again, I began to think about God, imagining communication with something that I couldn't see or identify. I took a picture of a shadowy crack on the ground. I thought that a long and focused look at whatever I'm drawn to in a place where I linger could reveal something. When I went back later, the crack was still there. Away from the house, it is easy to let the same structures that dictate my life at home and at school determine what I experience everywhere if I am not careful to stop and freely consider. Later that week, I went out with my girlfriend in her car. We went out to lunch in the afternoon, and then she dropped me off at Armory Park south of Broadway Avenue at about 3:30 p.m. I started out sitting on the edge of the park's white stage under its arched metal beams, also painted white, watching the park and the people in it. A man got out of the car and met two women who arrived walking. The three of them sat on the ground, apparently hiding from the sun below a low bush, and talked for a long time. Eventually I got up to move around the park, noticing a 12-pack of Coca-Cola lying open on a bench. Take one for free. And two men dressed in dark clothes sitting at a circular picnic table nearby. They watched me take a picture of the box on the bench, and I wondered why they were there. I felt self-conscious, so I walked away and sat down at a bench facing a memorial of some kind. There I could see half of a middle-aged man who sat facing me on the other side of the monument, and I wondered why he was there too. Soon I saw that he was with a woman, apparently around his age, though she used a walker, and they carried on some kind of a conversation. I didn't feel especially comfortable sitting there, so when I turned to look at the other side of the park and saw an older man laying in the sun with his head resting on a bag of stuff at the base of a palm tree, I decided to follow his example. I gathered my things to a smooth shape inside of my cloth sack bag and tried to make myself comfortable under another palm in the park. Laying against the palm tree in a public place, I looked out at the sky. Clouds turned yellow by the almost setting sun. I thought again about something supernatural that could gather everything together in a constantly transforming synthesis. I could lay my head on the bag and close my eyes and still be exactly there in an unoccupied park. Eventually I fell out of my reverie, and noticing that the men who seemed to have provided the Coca-Cola were gathering their things and leaving their circular picnic table, I decided to follow their example too, and moved in at their now unoccupied table, attracting the attention of another group of men of various ages at another nearby table. Once seated, I smoked a miniature cigar and tried to read part of a Philip K. Dick novel about a vast, active, living intelligence system, which was the universe, but I soon got bored and went back to observing. A younger man and woman had set up a slackline near the palm I had rested against previously and were taking turns trying to walk across it. People entering the park from downtown to the north caught the corner of my eye. I turned and saw the same darkly dressed men whose table I had taken walking towards me across the park, this time accompanied by a third man. The one who wore a black baseball hat with New York City and a city stitched on it in white asked me if they could sit at the table. I said yes, and once seated, he introduced himself as Gabriel, and his companions as Daniel and John. Gabriel described himself as a Dominican and emphasized that he was, in fact, from New York City, but had moved to Tucson about 2 years ago to open sober living houses. He looked to me to be about 35 years old. His companion, Daniel, apparently Hispanic, was younger. In fact, I soon learned that he was 21 like me. John, the other new companion, seemed distraught. He was middle-aged, white, slightly heavy, with long hair and sunglasses on his head and tears welling in his eyes. Gabriel explained that he was going through something very difficult in his life, that his girlfriend had recently been diagnosed with a terminal illness. I assumed that Daniel and John were inhabitants or somehow connected to Gabriel's sober living houses. Gabriel lit a parliament and explained that he was the writer of urban fiction and asked me to put my email address in his phone so he could send me a copy of a book he was working on. He said he didn't ever use text or social media, only email. I asked if they came to the park often, and Gabriel answered no, but that he had been around all of Tucson walking. He then turned to John, who was still about to sob, and said that he would be there for his old friend in the hard times, but that John had to promise to stop crying for the whole night. At first I was surprised to hear him say this to his friend who was going through something so terrible, but then I saw that Gabriel was on the edge of tears too, and I realized that he was afraid and that he could hardly bear to see the emotions of his friend's loss. John refused a cigarette, having quit nicotine for 4 months, he said, but thankfully accepted Daniel's THC pen and took long hits of it, looking up with big eyes towards the treetops. They each opened a tall can of beer, and Gabriel praised the beauty that surrounded us in that evening's yellow light. I sat with them and wondered what they would do for the rest of the evening and for the night. Realizing that it was too dark to take their pictures, I looked down at my camera and saw that a bird had pooped on it. Only a small amount. Gabriel offered me a plastic bag to wipe it off with and said that it was good luck and that my camera had been blessed. I agreed and looked at John, imagining how he might feel and if he knew where he was. Disoriented by the dying light and not knowing exactly where I was or if the globe was falling away, I decided to leave the park, walking towards Broadway. I called my girlfriend and asked her to drive across town to pick me up on the corner. I stood waiting for her on a patch of dirt between the sidewalk and an empty lot just down the street from a crosswalk and a bus stop. I leaned against a telephone pole and closed my eyes, opening them when I heard running steps coming towards me on the sidewalk. A young man ran, but missed the bus, turning back to walk the way he had just come. I closed my eyes and imagined the world falling away. I still heard the cars and some people talking excitedly nearby, but I didn't open my eyes to look. I saw myself as a baby, 2 or 3 years old, able to walk. Each step I grew larger, still a child. I walked until I was as big as the earth, and then walked around it. I stepped into space, still growing. When I felt as big as the world, I opened my eyes and I saw Tucson streets, apartment complexes, and coffee shops, and semi-permanent landscapes, clear picture of low light, and we found another place to stop.